Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update. First part thereof for the 30th of May 2024. Let's get straight to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, and can be found in the description to the video below. Okay, 1,160 personnel lost is a high number, but not as high as we have seen over the last few weeks, dropping back down to nearer to 1,000, but still, that's a really significant loss statistic for the Russians. 10 tanks is not as high as we have seen, but you don't want to be losing 10 tanks a day. 22 armoured personnel vehicles is higher than average, as is 35 artillery systems, about double average. So not the highest figures we've seen in any of those categories, but still significant losses. One multiple launch rocket system to be added, as well as 53 vehicles and fuel tanks, fairly high there, and 11 pieces of special equipment likewise. Of course, that category has a wide remit, can include things like surveillance and comms equipment, excavators, deminers, all sorts of different things to be had in there. Electronic warfare too. So that is a so-so day for the Ukrainians. I mean, really pretty good, but just not as high as we have seen. No Andrew Perpetua stats at the moment. They will probably come in a little bit later. So we'll bring into play some other data points. The third prisoner of war camp, Center 3, has started work in Ukraine. They started work on it. A new camp for Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine was forced to open due to a large number of Russians who surrendered and the actual blocking of exchanges by the Russian side. So not only are they supposedly capturing quite a few POWs at the moment, and that gives you an indication of what's going on in the war. I mean, that number in the personnel, it will be killed, wounded, and I would have thought deserted and captured. But yeah, not only are they capturing more, but also they have not exchanged recently, and that's according to the Russian ombudsman themselves admitting that, as I reported the other day. I think there are some complaints about the lack of willingness to do so. Could even be, well, it goes back to the destruction of that cargo plane that supposedly had POWs on but didn't. Yeah, we haven't seen an awful lot of exchanges since then. Anyway, unfortunately, Russians are using FPV drones to destroy Ukrainian naval drones. Here's some imagery, unclear about where this has happened, but you can see a Ukrainian naval drone being targeted by an FPV drone. That's adaptation. There was a massive attack by these drones last night, actually, so this could be a precursor to that attack. A bit more activity from those naval drones out in the Black Sea over the last few days could have caused that incident to have happened. There is no restriction on Ukraine using US-supplied air defenses to shoot down Russian missiles or fighter jets over Russian territory, quote, if they pose a threat to Ukraine, according to the Washington Post. We're going to look at in a little bit more detail. There seems to be a shift in US policy, either in place at the moment or imminent. Good news, it seemed like there was too much of a gathering momentum to stop that from happening. Many countries have come out in support of Ukraine being able to strike Russian targets within Russia. Zaporizhia Oblast. So what do we have here? This is a Ukrainian long-range attack drone reportedly hitting a Russian Buk Telar. So this is an Buk M1, an air defense system, transporter, erector, launcher, and radar, roughly 100 kilometers behind the front line near Melitopol. Russian SAM suffered a catastrophic ammunition detonation and a rare turret loss. Now, why I'm including this is because actually the Russians have had the advantage in those medium range attack drones in that kind of area where they've been using Lancets against Ukrainian bits of kit, like key, say, air defenses, but also artillery pieces in that sort of 20 to 100 kilometer range, I guess. I don't know what the range of the Lancets are. There's probably different ranges. They have different levels of munitions on board as well. Ukraine has supposedly got an equivalent to the Lancet, but we haven't seen it being particularly used. I haven't seen too much footage of that kind of range of strike. So this is significant that we have an air defense munition taken out by something that is operating in that sort of range. The Ukrainians, I think, are behind the curve on this one. They are doing so well in terms of use of drones, but this is the one area that they really need to just pump out a load of 100-kilometer drones to strike at 100-kilometer range drones to strike at these sorts of targets, but much further behind the line. So they've increased FPV drones maybe to about 20-kilometer range, which is really useful. You can hit further and further behind the front lines with those, but it's in that next category of targets that the Ukrainians really need to work. Okay, Russian authorities have reported a large-scale fire in Moscow in a warehouse that has spread to 4,000 square meters. There's various images coming out. It looks like another significant fire that is gathering momentum. Former Taurus machine building plant in Moscow is on fire. It's these sorts of incidents that are happening so often that they have to be connected to the war, and that's why I keep reporting on them. That's the sort of thing that would gather, national news in the UK. That's happening every other day somewhere in Russia. Just incredible. Okay, then onto distance attacks. We have had quite a large scale attack on, we'll see where it's mainly aimed at, but on Ukraine. Now, there are 32 Shahid drones that were fired into Ukraine, all 32 shot down, according to the Ukrainians. 7 out of 11 KH-101 or KH-505 cruise missiles and 0 out of 8 S-300s. Now, those S-300s appear to have been shot into Kharkiv yesterday. It's very difficult to shoot those down. Not only do they have a trajectory that's very difficult to shoot down, but they are not in the air long enough. So they're fired just over the border in Belgorod. And this goes back to the Ukrainians being given permission to shoot at targets in Belgorod. Now that seems to be in place. You would hope that these S-300 launchers would be very vulnerable right now. I hope that within a week you'd see them absolutely hammered by ATACMS. Surely the Ukrainians know where they are. Anyway, they are hammering Kharkiv still. 7 out of 11 cruise missiles shot down, so that's still 4 getting through. Now let's have a look at where they were aimed at. So you've got, it looks like Kharkiv was the target for all the those ballistic missiles, and then the cruise missiles and the drones almost entirely, with a couple of exceptions here and there, but almost entirely aiming for Starokonstantinov. So this is the airbase in Khmelnytsky Oblast that not only are the Storm Shadow firing Su-24Ms based there, but the F-16s are likely to be based there. I think the Russians are really, really focusing on that airbase, on making it non-operational for the F-16s. We're going to pop into Justin Bronk's interview on Times Radio yesterday to talk about how challenging it is to operate F-16s. So although they're getting F-16s, the Ukrainians, and it's all kind of, yay, happy days, they're not going to be the panacea. There will be challenges, and the Ukrainian pilots won't have had enough training on them, really, certainly to operate in larger groups. They need really good runways. They're a single engine fighter, so you suck up stuff into that engine, that's your plane gone. You need really good runways, and Starokonstantinov is getting absolutely hammered. And of course, out of 11 cruise missiles, 4 have got through. What did they hit? During the night, a missile attack took place on the Kerch area in Crimea. That was reported widely last night as it was happening. There were images coming out of explosions, some reporting up to 20 explosions. Now, the Russians are reporting stuff today that appear to be typical for what the Russians say. Doesn't fit in line with cluster munitions being used and explosions happening. But anyway, As claimed by some Ukrainian sources, the target was near the bridge, but not the bridge itself. So many people were initially thinking S-400 or S-300 air defense systems near the Kerch Bridge could be a shaping operation before attacking the bridge itself. At the same time, Russian appointed advisor to head of Crimea wrote the following: while repelling an enemy attack on the transport infrastructure of the city of Kerch, 2 ferries, a car ferry and a railway ferry were damaged from the debris of downed missiles. The glazing of the superstructures was damaged. So superstructure is the part of a ship that is, the wheelhouse, or if it's a much larger ship, the main bridge and area. So the mere glazing of the superstructures were damaged. There were no casualties among sailors or civilians. Once the damage is assessed, ferry service will resume. So there's lots of video footage of explosions and whatnot in the distance around Kerch. Now, this is, well, if you know where Kerch is, there, the Russians are making these claims that there was only some falling debris from destroyed ATACMS ballistic missiles being shot down there, falling on some boats. That's highly unlikely. Air defense engagements seen earlier from Anapa, Krasnodar Krai on the other side of Kerch Strait. So there was activity both in Kerch and also on the way down the coast into Krasnodar. We'll come to that. So we're unsure as to whether there was any significant damage to military equipment. The Russians are, and we'll come to this in a little while, are now saying that one of those boats has sunk, one that just had the glazing damaged. Anyway, before we get there, because there's a synopsis of both these sort of strikes, it's worth noting that at Chornomorska, so we're going to go back to this map. Chornomorska is over on this side. I think it's up here. We had the V5s attacking, or it could be down here actually. A V5 Magura, the Sea Baby drones, attacking again. On May the 30th, 2024, Special Unit, the main intelligence directorate, the GUR, of the Ukrainian Group 13, with the help of Ukrainian-made Magura V5 maritime attack drones, attacked Crimea. They destroyed 2 Russian KS-701 Tunets high-speed amphibious boats. So that is what happened last night. They were being attacked by helicopters. These drones, I don't know how many were taken out by the helicopters, how many got through. But it does seem that 2 of those KS-701 Tunets were taken out. So Russian media is reporting that last night's strike on occupied Crimea destroyed 4 boats. That is 2 ferries and a pilot boat. 2 more KS-701 boats were damaged in addition to the 2 destroyed ones. So 4 boats and 2 ferries and a pilot boat were destroyed, and another 2 KS-701s were damaged. So I'm not quite sure if those numbers don't quite add up, but certainly 2 of these KS-701s were destroyed. Now, Rybar, the pro-Russian source, says of this strike, a complex strike on Crimea took place. This night, the AFU carried out a new attack on the Crimean peninsula, they say, and you can see a map of where the attacks were. There's Chornomorska, as well as going out into, I presume there's one that was blown up there, another one that was blown up, hit by probably by helicopters roaming around, and you've got an aerial drone hitting, the claim is hitting air defense at Cape Tarkankut there. So that's not something I've heard about elsewhere, but interesting. So tonight, the AFU carried out a new attack on the Crimean Peninsula after several days of break. In anticipation of the strike, Ukrainian uncrewed boats began to mark off Crimea. Around noon, Ka-29 and Mi-24 helicopters destroyed 2 drones west of Sevastopol, and in the evening, another BEC was detected and shot down by Mi-8 crew northwest of the Cape Tarkankut. But the main events unfolded after midnight. First, 8 ATACMS operational tactical missiles were fired at Kerch from the Mykolaiv region. Units of the 31st Division successfully shot down all the targets, so that's all ATACMS being shot down. They never actually provide evidence of that. However, due to the use of cluster warheads, some debris fell to the Kerch port area, damaging 2 ferries, but more damage was avoided. At the same time, up to 6 BECs were detected near Chornomorska, so those are the Magura V5s, and were fired upon, but 2 maritime drones penetrated Uzkaya Bay. 1 BEC, alas, a video is already on the web, hit a boat near the pier, and the second was destroyed near another border patrol boat boat, causing it to suffer minor damage. At the same time, a Ukrainian drone from the Odessa region was operating just northwest of Chornomorsk, monitoring the situation on the peninsula. In this case, attention should be paid to the tactics of the enemy. The BECs kept at a distance from Crimea until the missile threat was introduced. At this command, all the border guards of the Federal Security Service of Russia began to go back to the bay, and the booms were briefly open. And at that moment, 2 drones penetrated into the bay, taking advantage of the lifting of the nets that covered the entrance to the base point of the Black Sea Fleet and the border service of the Federal Security Service of Russia. The attacks were not only geographically separated, one in the east of Crimea, the other in the northwest, but they were carried out simultaneously for a reason, and the entrance to the bay was open, and there were fewer personnel due to the missile threat of the missile attack. So if that is true, that's interesting. That's good tactics by the look of it by the Ukrainians, which is hit Kerch with missiles, meaning people will be distracted, thinking, right, we need to go and help out over here, sort out what's going on, get air defenses looking this way, and helicopters may be patrolling over this way. Meanwhile, you've got maritime drones, USVs, waiting to pounce, and as boats returned to harbour, they nipped in with them as the booms or as the nets opened at Chornomorsk, allowing those at least 2 of those drones to get in and cause some damage in the harbour to a couple of those fast attack boats. So that is what has happened, broadly speaking, on Crimea. As well, just down the coastline, I think, or is this near Kerch and Tuman on the Russian side? A Ukrainian drone fell on the oil storage. So yeah, this is over the Kerch Strait and onto the Russian side. There was this morning a drone that was filmed all sorts of small arms fire was aimed at it. Unfortunately, the person operating the camera is all swinging about all over the shop. You don't really follow the drone. And then the drone suddenly goes down. Now, what you can't tell whether the drone is shot down or whether it's on its terminal phase and dives down and then explodes somewhere behind here, and smoke then comes up. As you can see there, I've only got it very small because I get probably restricted, but you can go and sort of check this stuff out. That is inconclusive, that footage, as to what's happened, whether it was shot down or whether there's an explosion. Also, the beginning of the video, there's some smoke already coming up from somewhere. It looks over where the drone passes. So anyway, there's been an attack on an oil depot, possibly refinery, I'm not sure. It says oil storage here, so probably a depot. There's the smoke that you can see sort of going up. So I don't know whether that was successful in that Krasnodar Oblast. Who knows? There's also, this is just coming out now, smoke. I don't know how significant that is, quite a long way in the distance. Something boomed and smoked well into the area of the villages of Ivanovka and Denisovka near Simferopol, so that is in Crimea, and that's this morning. And then Russians are claiming to have shot down Ukrainian drones, but they also just happen to fall on electrical substations. So it's the classic, yeah, we've shot everything down, but actually the reality is they probably haven't shot everything down, and these things have hit the targets they were intended to hit, quite probably. And that's in, where is that? Temryuk region. So that's going into another area of Russia with their drones. Then yesterday, a huge explosion in Donetsk city. So the Ukrainians appear to have targeted something there. Not quite sure what it is. It's in the Kievsky district of Donetsk city, but something was targeted. And then Tim White says, a drone mystery inside Russia. A resident filmed one of Ukraine's long-range drones floating happily above Armavir in Krasnodar. Officials say it was shot down, but no one's posted anything or found wreckage. A drone hit the radar station last week. So this would appear to be the third attack on Armavir. So Armavir is that one of the over-the-horizon, long-distance, 6,000-kilometer range radars predominantly for spotting nuclear missiles. So this is part of their nuclear war defense setup. but it appears that it was targeted again yesterday. That could be the third time this place has been targeted. There have been newspaper articles. There's one in the Washington Post. It's a bit of a problematic article, I have to say. Apparently expressing the US concern about these strikes. So, as Nell report says, the US is concerned about recent Ukrainian drone strikes targeting Russian nuclear early warning systems. The concern arises as the Biden administration considers lifting restrictions on Ukraine using US supplied weapons for cross-border attacks. Quote, these sites have not been involved in supporting Russia's war against Ukraine, a US official said, but they are sensitive locations because Russia could perceive that its strategic deterrent capabilities are being targeted, which could undermine Russia's ability to maintain nuclear deterrence against the United States. There's a couple of interesting things going on here. I wonder whether behind the scenes in the US, they're actually going, awesome. Like, awesome. This is an absolute bonus for the US nuclear strategic, I guess, landscape, the whole kit and caboodle here. If Ukraine are damaging Russia's ability to prosecute a nuclear war successfully and effectively, this is an absolute bonus. So you might get newspaper articles coming out saying, oh, we're really concerned. My opinion is that's just for the audience of Russia, right? If the US are concerned, then it makes no sense. Concerned about escalation, because there's been no escalation. The Russians haven't released a nuclear missile as a result of this, so we're all right. That's been hit, possibly targeted 3 times, and another over-the-horizon radar was targeted as well. So effectively that's 4 strikes or 4 potential strikes on those facilities. Nothing has happened. The US must be in reality going, come on, Ukraine, you can do it again. And then just saying, oh, we're really concerned about this. So on the one hand, I think there's every reason to believe these are kind of anonymous sources saying what they want Russia to hear. And this is a very much a strategic message. PS01 here saying, today an article in the Washington Post about Ukrainian strikes on over-the-horizon radars. We love the US anonymous official who repeats Russian propaganda and who's obviously misinformed, but those radars were involved in monitoring Ukrainian strikes with Storm Shadows and long-distance drones. So just a couple of excerpts that PS01 points out here. A US official who spoke on a condition of anonymity because of the matter's sensitivity. Yep, okay, so we don't know who this is. The question is this actually what the US government wants to say, or is this a genuine leak? Not leak, but someone off the record saying, yeah, we're really worried. And again, it's like, you know, when things appear in the newspapers in Russia, we always go, well, that's been sanctioned by the Kremlin. In the same way, has this been sanctioned by the US government? And I can't help but think it probably has been. Anyway, quote, these sites have not been involved in supporting Russia's war against Ukraine, the US official said. But then later, that Russia has used the radar sites to monitor the Ukrainian military's activities, particularly Kiev's use of aerial weaponry such as drones and missiles. The official speaking on a condition of anonymity. So he's actually saying both things. Yeah, these sites are not being used, so we're a bit worried because they're not used by the Russians in the war against Ukraine. And then, yeah, they're used to detect Storm Shadow missiles. What's going on there? Complete mixed messages. Yeah, just slightly problematic. We also like the comment by the Russian-born Dmitry Alperovich, who has shown more than once to suffer from Russian reflexive control. He is sanctioned by Russia, but he is a guy who is an IT specialist and believes that he can switch at will into geopolitics. God, I absolutely hate people that have an expertise in one area that switch to talking about geopolitics and the war in Ukraine. Anyway, Dmitry Alperovich, a security analyst and chairman of the Silverdew think tank, says, quote, but that means attacks by Kiev on Russian nuclear deterrence infrastructure has potential to trigger a perilous escalation with the West. At the end of the day, nuclear command and control and early warning sites should be off limits. I completely disagree, because I think they are not just about nuclear target acquisition, nuclear weapons acquisition, but they are seeing planes and missiles and all sorts in the skies and relaying that information to the Russian forces. So Yeah, that's my tuppence. That really, I would expect. If the Americans really felt proper strong about the Ukrainians not striking those places, then why have we seen it happen 4 times? So my thinking is that the Americans don't mind it. It might get to a point where they say, "Oh, actually, hang on, it is getting a bit of a problem now." But yeah, right. Andrew Perpetua say Russia dropped 2 1,500 kilogram fuel air bombs on a random village 20 kilometers behind Chasiv Yar. They demolished 103 houses, 12 civilian cars, and wounded 7 people and a 4-year-old child. Absolute horrific destruction there on a village. This happened yesterday, and I read about it yesterday, but I didn't have time to really digest what I'd read until just now. That's horrific, what the Russians are doing with their bombs. Now, this leads Andrew Perpetua to say something, and I'm going to read out what he says because I am completely on board with this. In fact, this is what I've been saying for ages. How many times have you heard me say, they would if they could, they aren't, so they can't? That's basically my mantra for what the Russians are doing for a lot of their activities in this war at the moment and for the last however many months. So Andrew says, Russia is escalating their use of force on civilians across Ukraine because their military is rapidly deteriorating. And there is nothing anyone can do to make Russia escalate more than they have. Because frankly, if Russia could escalate more, they probably already would have. So key. This is so important. So when you look at these sorts of images and you see 32 Shaheeds, 11 cruise missiles and 8 S-300s sent to Ukraine. Like, there's no doubt that Russia would like to have sent in 400 Shaheeds, 300 cruise missiles, 200 S-300s. Like, if they could do that, they would absolutely obliterate meaningful targets. So what are they not able to find the military targets that they need? There's just a few of them, Starokonstantinov, for example. Do they not have the missiles? Do they not have the launchers? Do they not have, why is it that they aren't doing more than what they're doing? And the answer has to be something to do with they probably don't have the ability. Or if they're stockpiling ready for a big one, they don't have the ability to both stockpile and do big attacks now. And you just don't have enough. Otherwise, they would. They just would. So Andrew goes on, and this is exactly what I've been saying. So if Russia had the ability to make an armoured fist to break through the front, they would. So this whole idea about Kharkiv, like what's it doing? Is it shaping up for a big counterattack? Is it this? Is it buffer zone? Blah, blah, blah. The idea is they just don't have enough troops. This is what I've been talking about for I don't know, months now, is that I'm looking at the front lines and thinking they just don't have the ability to take Konstantinivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk-Sloviansk. They don't really have the ability at the moment to properly take Chasiv Yar. They put 50,000 people up in Kharkiv. Why don't they put them in Chasiv Yar? They don't have the ability to get to Pokrovsk and all these other places and take back what they lost in say Robotina area and Velika Novosibirsk. Otherwise, they would have done. They would have just, walked over everywhere. If they had the ability to throw all sorts of equipment and troops at these problems along the front line, at these objectives along the front line, they would have done. So why haven't they? Because they can't. They have so deteriorated. So we talk about Ukraine being on their knees, but I keep saying Russia is on their knees as well. Yeah, anyway, if Russia had the ability to make an armor fist and break through the front, they would, but they can't because their army has deteriorated so much that this ability has gone. If Russia could bomb their way through to a breakthrough, they would, but they can't. At most, they cause attrition. If Russia could knock out Ukraine's power grid, they would, but they can't. They resort to dropping thermobaric weapons on civilians and firing missiles into civilians because it's the capability they have in their arsenal. They can keep sending S-300 missiles across the border in Belgorod and hitting Kharkiv because they've got enough of those missiles and the Ukrainians can't shoot them down. And at the moment, Ukraine haven't been able to shoot back at those S-400 or S-300 launchers. And if the West has any backbone, says Andrew, at all, they would draw a line over firing massive effing thermobaric bombs into civilian populations, which Russia has done 3 times this week. And, you go back to this footage and you think, why is this not being reported as front page news in the New York Times or in the Washington Post or on Fox News? Like, why are they not talking about a village having 103 houses just destroyed by a massive thermobaric bomb or 2? It's absolutely outrageous. But the larger issue here is an issue for the Russians, is that this is kind of what they're forced to do. They just either don't have the targeting or the weaponry or both. And this is good news for Ukraine. Let me know what you think. Am I on the right track? Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. So Major General Ivan Popov, so one of the ones who's arrested, who was actually a well thought of officer who was fighting previously down in the southern area of Ukraine. He was recently arrested, as have many been, by Russia's FSB on charges of fraud. Reportedly believes he was set up by his former superior general Valery Gerasimov after selling scrap metal to raise funds for his troops. According to the source cited by the Telegram channel that Chris Owicki refers to a lot, quote, after Shoigu was removed from the post of defense minister, Popov refused the option offered to him earlier to resign for health reasons. Popov argued that he believed that Gerasimov, the chief of the general staff, who was the main organizer of the harassment against Popov, would be the next to resign. In addition, Popov has attempted to approach the FSB's military counterintelligence department, DVKR, in order to incriminate Gerasimov. Popov made it clear that he planned to bring down a dozen more officers who were also ready to testify. He's actually very popular with his troops, Popov, if I remember correctly, and this would be certainly a real big challenge for the higher echelons of the Russian MOD. On the eve of the arrest on May the 17th, Popov said that he refused to cooperate with the FSB on the issue and informed those who agreed to testify against Gerasimov that there was no need to do so anymore. Popov did not give any reasoning for this decision to his entourage. Those who were in contact with him noted his depressed state at that moment. It is also noteworthy that the evidentiary materials regarding the illegal sale of the metal structures by Popov were provided by the DVKR FSB. The case of Popov was directly handled by Anton Dermanenko, an officer of the DVKR FSB. It should be noted that the sale of the scrap metal is widespread activity among commanders of units that are in the war zone. At the same time, the servicemen of the 58th Army claimed that Popov transferred all the money from the sale of scrap metal to the needs of his units because of the conflict with Gerasimov. So this is why he's popular with his troops, because actually that wasn't so much corruption. That was raising money so that these guys had equipment to fight in the war against Ukraine. Now, other thing that I've only just realized here, we've been talking about, so Andrew Perpetua was saying one of his 30 square kilometer satellite images that he was poring over recently, I might get this stat wrong, but he said 90% of the destroyed and abandoned and damaged vehicles had been recovered. It's like a huge number. It's like, what's going on there? Now, if Russian generals have a big thing for selling scrap metal on to raise funds either from themselves or for their units, that explains why they are recovering so many pieces of totally destroyed, effectively scrap, that have no value other than the raw material of that metal. So when you see some of these husks of BMPs or T-80s that have completely detonated and all the ammunition inside has secondarily exploded, and you're wondering, what are you doing taking that off the battlefield? Like that's quite a high risk thing to do, and that's only useful for scrap metal. It's because they want the scrap metal. Now, I assume it's not for an overarching need from the Russian armed forces, MOD, state for scrap metal to remake vehicles, although they will need that. But the idea is, I don't think that's going to be a central directive to these generals to say, get all your stuff off the field because we need scrap metal. It's probably, we're going to get some stuff off the field because we need scrap metal because I can make some money selling that back to Russia to get so that they can do whatever they want with it and make more tanks or whatever. But this is all about my decision to do that, to line my own pockets or support my own unit with much needed financial support for supplies. So interesting, that would fit in. That's completely my speculation, but the idea here is that Russian generals routinely are selling off scrap metal for a gain. Suddenly makes sense of why certain vehicles are recovered that probably shouldn't be. Or at least, not for the repair of that vehicle or spare parts for others. Jay in Kiev points out that Russia is building housing for their aircraft. The realization sets in is just how bad the Biden administration screwed over Ukraine by blocking their ability to fire on Russian territory. What a huge missed opportunity, soon totally gone, as Biden dithers. So he's not a fan, by the way, Jay in Kiev is not a fan of Trump. He's not a fan of Biden. He is an American who is in Ukraine and just wants the US to be making the best decisions possible, and he sees that everyone is just making bad decisions. Anyway, at the airfield 300 kilometers from the border, the Russians began to build protective hangars. This is interesting because Russia has decided not to do that at their airfields in occupied territories, and they've been slagged off for not doing that because the Russians have known about this for a long time. They knew that ATACMS would probably eventually come, and yet they didn't build protective hangars. And as ATACMS have hit these airfields, aircraft have been destroyed, and they're like, why didn't we build anything? But they are building them now 300 kilometers from the border. Why is that significant? Because even if the US ATACMS can be used inside Russia, they won't be able to hit 300 kilometers behind the border. They've got a range of 300 kilometers. They're going to be fired from like 30 kilometers behind the border or whatnot. These are just out of range. And also, even if they were in range, but to something, they are building these protective hangars, so they're going to be moving their airframes back. I doubt there are going to be many air bases used in Ukraine, maybe just as forward operating bases. This will affect the efficiency of their air missions, that's for sure, but it will be protecting their airframes. Russians have begun building those airfield hangars to protect aviation from attack drones and cluster munition missiles. Right, they have also almost finished, it appears, the railway line that is going down in Donetsk Oblast, south of Donetsk Oblast through Zaporizhia. So right from Rostov-on-Don through Taganrog onto sort of Mariupol and Berdyansk. It appears that they are very close to finishing that, or possibly even just finishing it now. There's a big thread here by Tatarugami. Our team assesses that this new railroad would suffice to supply the region, even if the Crimean Bridge is destroyed. Additionally, the railroad reduces time travel from Russia. For more details on the impact, you can see one of their reports on that, Frontelligence Insight. This, I'm fairly sure, will be a prominent target for the Ukrainians. All I can assume is they've been waiting for it to be finished to then blow it up, and maybe wait for all those crews to move away. And then blow it up, and then they have to come back and then keep doing that rather than blowing up while they're building it, and you've got the crews there. I don't know, but I assume that the Ukrainians will have a handle on what's going on there for sure. Now, second bit of footage coming out. The previous one was Yakutia. This is actually somewhere closer. Where is it? Yekaterinburg. So this is like the third main city in Russia. So, quote, "It's impossible to breathe. There's garbage here. We piss here. We crap here. The feeding windows closed. The doors don't open." So these guys are imprisoned. These are wounded Russian soldiers, and they're being held in a military unit in Yekaterinburg and forcibly sent back to Ukraine. As one of the soldiers told Astra Media, the men are beaten there, threatened with jail, and forced to return to the front line. The man himself managed to escape and is now in hiding, according to him, in his hometown. His law enforcers have already searched his home and even his wife's workplace. Quote, "My wife is in shock. My 12-year-old daughter has been told that I am a traitor to the motherland." According to him, he was not in Ukraine. The man decided to refuse military service back at the training stage in Orenburg, where, quote, "Nothing was taught. They were drunk and used drugs. I was there for 2 months and saw nothing but drunkenness. I came to the conclusion that I didn't need it, that I made a mistake, overreacted, watched TV." he said, "It is widely known that Russia is famous for its complete disregard of human life," says Anton Gerashchenko, and the man claims he to have just found out. So these are refuseniks, I would have thought, and injured, who are being, like we've seen in Yakutia, where the injured were being forced to go back to war but refused because conditions are obviously terrible, and that gives you an indication of the morale of the Russian troops who have either been recruited or who have been injured. Then to add to that, War Translated says, Dmitry from War Translated says, a mobilized Russian soldier and part-time blogger suddenly realized that the heaps of gold promised to the recruits by the authorities were insufficient to buy an apartment upon returning to their hometowns, especially for those from major cities. In fact, they are unashamed to admit that they went to war simply to earn money for housing, as they couldn't achieve this through honest work in Russia. In other words, it's a way to social mobility. Is what I've said before, although it seems to be more of a shortcut to death. But it gets better. They also checked used car prices and found that all their war savings, up to 2 million rubles max, so about £17,500, so that'd be sort of $20,000, are enough to buy a used Skoda Octavia. So a pretty mid-range car. Skodas used to be laughable. Now when they were taken over by Volkswagen, they're now half decent. But the idea is that, to me, this says that car prices have gone up. Why have car prices gone up? Well, sanctions, supply, demand, etc., etc. Are we really the elite of the society? He questions. Someone having second thoughts about how important war veterans really are, how they're seen in society, and they're not being paid enough. Well, then Dmitry from War Translated also adds that payments to Russians who are ready to join the meat assaults continue to increase. So the idea is, we're not paid enough. And then that feeds into people's general idea of, joining the volunteering for the war, being sent to Ukraine. If you're thinking, right, I've been told that my relatives or my friends have been treated badly, not paid enough. When they get injured, they're sort of beaten up, tortured, to be forced to go back. I've been told my father's a traitor. All these kind of ideas that are milling around society means that you are going to struggle to get volunteers to join up, right? It's not that the war's a bad idea. It's that the war is being prosecuted poorly and their troops are being treated badly. So they are having to increase, especially since back in the economy, you will have a labour shortage for forcing wages to rise. So then wages are rising in the, say, defence military industrial complex or other places around the economy, and you're thinking, well, I could join the army, get treated badly, get paid fairly well, or I can get paid even better back here working in a factory that they really need. I'll be ring fenced. I probably won't have to go to war. Work in that factory, get paid more and won't die. So then the army have to say, okay, well, how do we compete with this? So then they have to put up the wages of the armed forces, and then you've got this wage inflation spiral that acts as a problem inside the Russian economy again. Anyway, so in Sakhalin, they're already offering up to 400,000 rubles per month. That's £3,500 a month. That's almost $4,000 a month for signing a contract with the so-called Ministry of Defence. That's a 2 times increase. That is a pretty decent wage they're going on there. They have even promised some kind of social package, apparently one that is completely black. I don't know what that means. Such posters reminiscent of blockbuster movie posters are still surreal for me, says War Translator, says Dmitry, looking at these kinds of posters. But yeah, there's a social package, vacation from 40 to 75 days. Wow. Free travel on vacation to any place in the country. Wow. Compensation for utility bills to 50%. Wow. Family social support. So this is incredibly attractive, you would think, especially if you need that social mobility. This is your only option for social mobility. Say you're in Yakutia or Buryatia or somewhere over to the east that is less developed as and less elite as places like Moscow and St. Petersburg, this is really attractive, and it goes to show that there is trouble back in the state. There's something's rotten in the state of Denmark. We have an issue here in Russia whereby they desperately need boots on the ground, but they're having to compete to get those boots on the ground, whilst also forcing people who are injured back in, forcing refuseniks back in, and then rounding up people who supposedly have exemptions due to illness and forcing them in despite that. So they really, really need those mobilized troops. Now, Russia is to increase taxes on companies and wealthy individuals to further fund the war against Ukraine. So this then fits in with offering really attractive packages now, because people are complaining they don't have enough to buy cars and buy houses because inflation, have to pay them more. How do you get the money to pay them more? You raise the taxes on wealthy individuals and companies. The tax changes expected to be implemented in 2025 will raise approximately $29 billion yearly and impact around 2 million people. So that is going to be happening down the line. All the while, we've got General Syrsky, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, saying Russia is building up forces near Kharkiv Oblast, so they're getting more reinforcements in there, but they're not enough to break through the Ukrainian defences. So there's been a lot of dooming, but actually I think things are possibly on the turn for Ukraine. I could be wrong. It depends whether Russia really does have any strength and depth of those being trained up behind in Russia, ready to be brought to the front lines. That's the only kind of caveat I would apply. Russian forces are increasing the number of troops near the villages of Strelecha and Lipsy, as well as the town of Vovchansk. These numbers are not enough to carry out a new offensive, according to Syrsky. So the Russians have ground to a halt in those places. Anyway, that's enough from me for today. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care. Speak soon. Too much of me talking. Toodle pips.